listening to the sultry sound of The Beards, the hairiest tag team in British wrestling today, reminding you to resist the razor and remember, facial hair is for life, not just for hipsters. I'm Carl Atlas, the keyboard warrior, and with me is my bearded brethren, Big Mad Dog Brian Quinn, my facial fuzz famalam. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Beard's first official podcast. At the time of recording this, we are about 1 week removed away from WrestleMania. And so the goal of this podcast is we're going to put a topic in the barber's chair and we're going to trim it and cut it to pieces and get as close to the razor's edge on it as we can, and give you our bristling opinions on things. And obviously the obvious one for this week is to talk about WrestleMania 36, or as it is affectionately being called, EMPTY Mania. So
I think what we should do, Carl, is, we're the Beards, right? So we should, when we pick the matches we like, we should let it grow, and the ones we don't like, we should definitely get rid. So we should definitely mow it.
Yeah, grow it or mow it. I like that. I think so. What we're gonna do something a little bit different. We're not going to review the whole show because, if you watched it, you'll have your own opinions, and we don't want to bore you to death. There's going to be plenty of reviews out there on podcasts and YouTube, etc. So we're going to pick 6, and we're going to pick 2 that we think they need to be mown. They need to go. They weren't very good. For whatever reason, our opinion is that they need to go. We're going to pick 2 that should be grown, that we both agree were fantastic, and then we're going to pick 2 that you and I differ on, that we've got differing opinions on. So should we kick off? Let's go for the negatives. Let's go for the one that we thought sucked the most first.
So I have to put it out there. I think the one that was the weakest match of the entire weekend, Saturday or Sunday night, for me was Goldberg Strowman on so many levels. On so many levels. I 100%
agree. I 100% agree. I thought it was. I know it was a difficult situation because it wasn't what was being built up. Obviously, Roman Reigns made the decision to, look after himself and his family, and quite rightly so. I defended his choice 100%. And what we were left with was Strowman being called in to take his place. And, here's the thing, right? You don't go into a Goldberg match anymore expecting a 5-star. I mean, I don't think anyone ever watched a Goldberg match expecting a 5-star classic. But what we got.
But 2 big lumps is the story is so easy to tell. You can build a simple story, and yet they didn't build any story.
No,
I didn't feel like 2 titans were clashing. I just felt like there was 2 guys just doing the bare minimum. And
literally.
Fair play. Strowman clearly knows that he's just a placeholder, so he's not excited. But it was still Mania. It was still up on the card. It was towards the back end of the card. I think they could have done a better job.
It was a title match, and it just had nothing. It really was just flat. It was 4 spears and 4 power slams. And in my opinion, that does not a match make.
Well, the thing is, hang on though, because if you and the reason why I think for me it sucked so bad and why I want to get rid of it is because if you contrast it to a very similar match that happened on night 2, very similar match with again a very similar restricted moveset in Drew versus Brock, then they didn't do much more. Okay, there was a handful of extra slams, there's a couple of extra suplexes, but we saw like 4 or 5 claymores. We saw 4 or 5 suplexes and 2 F5s. So it wasn't, on the grand schemes, a lot more, but the drama of it, the storytelling of it, why they were doing it, their expressions, the way that they got the moves, the way they got the moves over. Whereas with Goldberg versus Strowman, I didn't feel any tension or any competitiveness from that match.
I think you nailed it straight on the head. It's the same match. One is an exercise in how not to do that much, and one is an exercise in how to do that match right. And I think
the second match,
2. Got it right.
That second match, how that was a fantastic, electrifying match, but had nothing in it in the grand scheme of things. When you when you think of how much you can do in a match, when you think about, and we're going to get to this a bit later on when we talk about the matches we liked. You can put so much in a match, and yet they didn't. They put so little in, and it really worked, and it didn't work for Goldberg and Strowman.
No, I agree. So we need to mow that match. Get rid of it.
Moan.
Yeah, moan. And so our second pick may be a little bit more controversial. I think a lot of people out there would agree with our first pick. The second pick might ruffle the feathers of a few people, but that's okay because this is just our opinion. And so we went for Lashley versus Aleister Black. Talk to me about why you picked that one.
Okay, so for me, as a from a technical point of view, I thought it was excellent. You know, that you can't fault either of them. They're both specimens. They're both great workers. So I can't fault the wrestling. For me, you've got two guys. You've got an empty Mania, right? You've got an empty hall. And you've got two guys that are both known for being quite introverted and stoic. You know, for being dark and moody and quiet and not mouthpieces and not showing out. Even when there is a crowd, those two guys aren't known for being particularly vivacious or charismatic. So you got two guys, and I just didn't care.
I'm going to be brutally honest about both of these guys. I'm not an avid watcher of the product. I don't consume every minute of everything that they put out. There's just too much, and I've got too much else going on in my life. However, I am aware of both of them. I've sort of seen a little bit of their development. Obviously, this is not the first time Lashley's been on the main roster, but I'm not getting into that Aleister Black character. I'm not getting it. I don't think a lot of these. I mean, I have the same feeling about Finn Balor, and again, this is going to be controversial, but I feel like Finn Balor, Shinsuke, those kind of guys that people are like ranting and raving about, for me, it's all downhill after the entrance. He's got a fantastic entrance. You know, he's got the kind of the coffin rises up. He walks down to the ring all kind of moody and everything. And then the wrestling happens, and I don't know. I disconnect suddenly. I feel like the problem with a lot of these guys, Finn Balor is a prime example of this. You know, he'll do the whole demon entrance, and then he does the same stuff. You know, it's a drop kick and a kick and a double foot stomp off the top or whatever. And I feel it's the same problem with Aleister Black. There's a disconnect. As soon as his entrance is over, I don't feel like he's the same character in the ring.
Yeah, what's dark and moody and gothic about him once he's in the ring? Not much, other than the fact that he doesn't really show out too much. And maybe some people like, and you know, this is just our opinion, and maybe some people like that because, like I said, you can't take anything away from the wrestling match they had. You know,
No.
Very clean, botch free, not particularly clever in my opinion. Nothing that really stood out. And I thought, oh, that was good, or that was clever. It was just a pretty standard back and forth. The other thing that also stands out in that, when you've got two guys that are very stoic, and you've got a valet, the valet needs to work, and she didn't.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's why you have a valet. That's why a stoic person. That's why someone who's bad on the stick or lacking character but is a great specimen or a great wrestler. That's why they get chucked a valet, right? To carry, to put a bit of personality and flavor and to draw some heat or to draw some fan, interaction or some sort of favoritism. And she just stood there.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say. I think the reason that we are saying that we're going to mow this is because it was an awkward situation for everyone involved. I know it was a rushed, pre-recorded thing in an empty arena, but there are some matches that made that work. In fact, maybe even made the match better. And then there are some that didn't. And this is just one of those, I think, that was not. They didn't try to work around the empty arena, and they certainly didn't try to use that to their advantage, in my opinion. So yeah, it's got to be.
It's important to say, right, that this isn't like the only match. These aren't the only two matches we thought were lackluster. It's just these are the two that we agreed upon.
Oh,
we
absolutely.
just really could do without, and that in fact we would have been quite happy not to have them.
Yeah. I could have had that on a weekly TV show, and I wouldn't be moaning about it. But on a WrestleMania, I thought it could have been mown off quite easily.
That's another one. We're gonna moan. Oh, it's gone.
Right. So the the two that we agree rocked. Now, I think we should start with.
Well, let's start night one.
So yeah, night one then. Owens versus Rollins. We both agree rocked, need to be grown.
I could have watched that match for an extra, like, probably I could have watched that for an extra 10 minutes. They could have that 15 minutes up to the DQ.
Yeah.
And then I could have watched another 15. I could have watched another 15, 20 minutes.
This is what I was saying. I watched it live, and obviously you and I are experienced hands. We've been behind the curtain. We know what goes on, and I love it. Absolutely love it when I'm watching a wrestling match and something tricks me. Where they lead me one way and I react a certain way, and then they change something or whatever, they take me on that roller coaster. Because once I think you are behind the curtain and you've been in the ring and you know the ins and outs, I think those moments become fewer and far between because you kind of know the inner workings, don't you? But this match tricked me.
How many times have we had a finish? How many times have you and I, or anyone we know, or matches we've seen, or matches been involved with, where you do 15 minutes, it ends a certain way, you then start to G, and you're just G'ing for the next night?
Yeah,
how
exactly.
How many times
right?
have you stood there and said, "Come on, guys, who wants to see us do a tag match tonight?" Or who wants to see us have a rematch right now? Okay, well, you can see us in 3 weeks' time. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's the gimmick, right? That's the gimmick. And yet,
that was the brilliance of it, because I was like, oh, this is saving the show. This is amazing. It's it's ramping up. The wrestling's great. They're using their vocals to fill that empty sound. And both of those guys are great at kind of talking to each other and talking trash to each other during the match.
Rollins was hot.
Yeah.
He was talking to the camera. He was talking, to Owens. He was active. It was interesting. It was
both
engaging.
Those guys
it didn't matter that there wasn't a crowd there. And I think it's also worth saying, without a crowd, like, how hard is that sort of match? Like Owens versus Rollins, the things in that match, some of that stuff. You've got to be in fifth gear, and we know what it's. You've got to be in fifth gear, and you've got to generate that adrenaline on your own, like, without the crowd giving it to you. Some of those bits, you've got, that when he's climbing up, and you knew what he was going to do. That, when someone climbs on something, they're going to jump off it, especially if they've just laid a guy out on the announcers table. We know, it's a known trope. But how do you get there? Like, he got to the top, and you could kind of see in the back, like, you could look, like, there was a bit of a close up on him, and you could kind of see, like, oh crap. you could see the back of his head going, I'm really got to do this. And there's no way you can practice that. You can't rehearse it.
No. And the reports are that actually, had it happened in front of a live crowd at the Buccaneers arena, he was planning to do it off of an even higher. They've got an actual kind of pirate ship as part of the arena, and he was going to do it off of one of the sail mounts. So, I mean, but then again, adrenaline would have taken up for a lot of that. But this is the thing, and this is what we've spoken briefly about before. Some of these people approached it like it's Mania, whether it's empty or not. It's still WrestleMania, and it's still a chance for me to have a moment in time that will be crystallized forever, and to have a match that people will still talk about. And some people approach that with, everything they had, clearly. And Rollins and Owens did that night. And I think our second pick is another example of a match where the competitors involved in it just said, you know what, we've had the build up. It's WrestleMania. We're going to have the match that we want to have, regardless of the empty crowd, and just gave it their all. And I think that's why that we agree that Owens and Rollins needs to be grown. And I would say grown as far as SummerSlam. Let's keep this going, because
grow it, plait it, and put some beads on the end of that beard. You know what I mean? Like put some Viking tabs on that. Like fully braid that one, weave in some interesting stuff, and let them really grow. That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely right. So I think that segues quite nicely into night two's pick. Then, do you want to introduce this one?
Yeah, because I'm going to introduce it because this one is probably my favourite match of the entire weekend, in my opinion. I thought this was fantastic. Flair versus Ripley, Charlotte versus Rhea. Like, that match, from start to finish, you talk about people that have wonderful entrances. Okay, I didn't think much of Ripley's entrance. I didn't really pay much attention. But Flair's entrance, as always, wonderful. Just just a fantastic entrance. But then that character, that attitude, that aura isn't left on the runway. Like, she takes that into her wrestling.
Yeah, Charlotte is, in my opinion, the best finished, polished product that the WWE has put out for years in terms of just, she is the total package. The entrance, the way she presents herself, she is consistently brilliant in the ring. And I mean, like, she can have those barn burner matches, but even when she's just doing a TV match,
she holds your attention. When she's doing a promo, when she's going out when she's doing her entrance, when she's doing the match, she just holds your attention. And I think Flair, and I think also there's a couple of other female wrestlers where we actually, in my opinion, I just use the term that I'd like to stop using with those particular workers, which is female, because I think actually for some of these workers, the female is actually irrelevant package wise. Like, you've got Flair, you've got Lynch. You've got Sasha Banks. They don't need the prefix female. I think they don't need. We don't need to say, oh, they're a great female worker, or they're the best female worker they've put out. They're consistently the best workers on shows, regardless of gender and what have you. For me, that match was just.
I would just say that Charlotte, I think, is just head and shoulders above everyone else that you just named. Like, they're all amazing, but Charlotte pips them every time, in my opinion.
Yeah, part of that's probably experience. Part of that's probably the osmosis of spending so much time around the business and being, being a legacy. Part of that's probably, just her she clearly understands each of the aspects of wrestling, the industry in general. But I want to get into the match a little bit. Like, that match just took hold and didn't let go.
Oh, it was pacey, wasn't it?
I thought at one point this is only going to be like a 7 or 8 minute match. You can't go at this pace for 20, 25, 30, and they did. They just took that pace, and they went and they went and they went and they went.
And again, we spoke about how much adrenaline plays a role in those style of hard-hitting, fast-paced matches with, all right, they weren't doing crazy apron bumps and dives off the stage and all the rest of it, but like you said, it was just go from
I think it stood out because of that. That's
Absolutely.
why it's my favourite match. Like, Owen versus Rollins was great. Some of the other matches were great, but they were spectacly. They had bits in it, like there was a ladder match in this, and that was a great match. And it's a ladder match, so it's going to be a spectacle. There's going to be some crazy stuff, and there was some crazy stuff. But Flair versus Ripley didn't have crazy stuff. She worked a body part. It was basic psychology. She worked a body part. The body part was obvious because it's for her finish. And that was fine because it was sold well, it worked well, they were consistent with it. So many times these days, you see people start working psychology. You see heels, whether it's on the E or whether you see it in independence. You see people work some psychology, work the head or work the arm, and then they go and finish with something that's not relate. Like, why did you put all that work into working a body part? Why did you put all that work on the psychology if you're just going to finish them with your regular finisher?
Yeah, absolutely. There's
quite a sneaky roll up, or
there's
or a slam. That just doesn't make sense to me.
No, I agree. So we both agree then that Flair Ripley needs to be grown. I'm
super excited to see what Flair does in NXT.
I was just going to say, this is where the growing aspect of it is going to be interesting, because I thought it was a really good result. A lot of people expected Rhea to have her WrestleMania moment and get her title back. But actually, I like the idea about having Charlotte Flair, someone with Charlotte's star power, back on NXT. We all know that they're doing it to compete with AEW a little bit on Wednesday nights, and it's a smart move. It's a smart move.
Elevate the product. Elevate
Absolutely.
it up. How do you elevate it? You drop your most charismatic, your most over, your most accomplished. You put them in there and let them let them bring everyone up to their game.
That's it. Exactly.
Not that NXT's not already like that, because in my opinion, for many years, NXT, and I'm not a big, as you know, I'm not a big follower of any wrestling product, but it's been my favorite product probably for quite a number of years. I've gone visiting, traveling to watch that show. If I catch any show, it's usually NXT or Takeover or something, because it's interesting, because the people are interesting, because you can see their passion and you can see their hunger. You know?
Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. So, shall we move on to the two that we differ on? Shall we, if I talk about the one that I liked, and I'll explain why, and then I'll let you talk about the one that you liked and explain why, and then I might chime in with why I disagree, and then you can chime in with why you disagree. And I do think that there is a third match that we do need to have a special mention on this one. So the match that I liked that you didn't like was the Boneyard match. So
yeah.
I was a huge fan of the cinematic style. Thought they did a great job with it. You know, I was a big fan of what Matt Hardy was doing with his broken character and the Ultimate Deletion. I love that cinematic style. I think, you know, it brings in a new perspective on how to put together a wrestling match, and you know, I do think it is one of those things that should be a special occasion. I don't think it needs to be like this all the time, but certainly, you know, someone like Undertaker, who is in his kind of swan song years, if you like, could do those cinematic style matches and still look credible. I thought it played off of both characters really well. I thought they both did. That it made the most of the situation. It felt to me like a kind of a low budget action / horror scene. I didn't mind even some of the hokier aspects of it, about, you know, Undertaker re-emerging from the pit, because, you know, we grew up on a diet of that stuff, and actually there was almost like a little nostalgic kind of like, oh yeah, like a nice moment there of Undertaker resurrecting, and it felt enough. It was close enough to being a wrestling match that it didn't pull me away from the WrestleMania side of things completely. You know, it's still WrestleMania. It's still, although it's a different take on a match and it's presented in a different way, it still felt like a match. It felt like a fight. And again, I thought the story was brilliant. The sound effects adding in, and the music, and some of the line deliveries by Undertaker and AJ were fantastic. I like the fact they played with all different elements. I was just a big fan. I enjoyed it. I thought it was
But this is where I disagree with you, because I don't think it felt like a wrestling match. I think that the camera angles were terrible. I think the shaky cam made me feel sick. And I think for me, you know, and this is Marmite, and sometimes I do have a different opinion to you, which is great, right? We don't want to always agree on the same things, right? But like, what are we trying to, like, what's that match trying to say? Like, are we trying to, like, I don't, it wasn't a match. It wasn't a matchup. And for me, like, I didn't get sucked in. There were bits I liked. Like, I came up through watching as you know, in the 90s, watching wrestling, and Taker was a big part of that. The comics, the cartoons, the mythology. I loved that. But you can't have a vignette that calls him out by his real non-working name, a name he's never used, right? You can't on one hand have a vignette or a build up to the marquee where it calls out Mark Callow, and then have him do a teleport and a fireball. Like, for me, that doesn't match up, because you've already removed me. I'm not in a wrestling match. I'm not in the arena. You're dodging around. You're making it look like a movie. You've got people being buried and their hands coming out. Like, what are we saying? AJ's dead now? Is this part of the product? Are we saying this is real? Are we saying that this is what happened? Like, because when you have a match, right? So in wrestling, when you have a match, someone has won and someone has lost, right? That goes on the card. Like, we all know it's a work, and we all know it's to a certain extent kind of faux, but there's still like a record of this person beat this person at that time, right? No one really cares apart from the fans. But what you're gonna say at WrestleMania? AJ died and was buried alive. Is that the result? Is that what we're saying? The result of WrestleMania was.
Had buried alive matches before, and it's always been kind of like, you know, universally accepted that, you know, the next week they're going to be dug out and nobody actually dies because it's wrestling. I don't know. I was able to suspend my disbelief just enough to get into that and enjoy it. And I take your points on board, I really do. However, I am going to use them against you when you defend your choice for your match that you liked. Go ahead, go and talk about the match that you enjoyed.
Well, the thing is, I think there was two things that weren't matches, and of the two, I liked the Funhouse because it wasn't a match, and at no point did it attempt to be. It was more psychological. It was more visceral. It told, in my opinion, the run of it from start to end told more of a story. It was less trying to be a movie brawl, right? Which is what I thought the Boneyard was trying to be, like a movie scene, cinematic brawl. And for me, it fell short of even achieving that. Whereas at least the Funhouse was completely different. Never seen it before. It was cerebral. It was, it was honest. It was cutting. Like it attacked Cena. It attacked Cena in the business. I thought it was clever. I thought it was, and again, you talk about people that are in their swan song, but to have a match where you're basically doing Cena's greatest moments, or his least great moments, his debut, the Thugonomics, Fruity Pebbles, all the way through to being leaving and being an actor, and his fear of just being Hulk Hogan, his fear of just being that corporate puppet. I thought that was really clever, and it didn't try to masquerade itself as a fight. It was a character assassination that clearly both sides were party to, but I just thought that's the sort of thing I'd like to see more. And I don't think that it should be every single time they have a Funhouse match. It should be. I've seen some commentary online, and I think that's really bogus. I think that every time that Bray has a Funhouse match, they should let his imagination and creativity run wild, and he should do something new. They shouldn't just. I saw some commentary online. They were like, "Oh, I wonder who he's going to do next." I'm thinking, no, don't throw someone in and do the same thing again. That's boring. Throw someone in and do something completely different. Because isn't that the joy of this? Giving Bray the creativity, the creative space to say, go on then, lad. Show us what you can do. And we'll put it on at Mania.
Yeah. I mean, I will, I totally agree with you that it was an experiment in creativity and letting Bray be Bray. And it is a breath of fresh air. I felt personally what disappointed me about it was it felt a little bit rushed. Now I know that is them, the whole night, the whole 2 nights really was making lemonade out of lemons because it was a bad situation. They had to rush to get the stuff filmed before the city went into lockdown. And I get that, maybe.
I think it was 8 hours they spent filming that, right? Which actually, in the grand scheme of things,
it's amazing.
It's amazing. That's not a lot of time. I have some experience with my YouTube channel, and I know how much footage goes into maybe a 9-minute YouTube video, which is quite dull with nothing interesting going on. Still, a lot of footage goes into that. So to get something like they created in 8 hours, wow! With you got puppeteering,
they managed to pull off in the time and with the resources that they had. I can't take away from that. I just think that, like you said, there were 2 matches that weren't matches, 2 ideas that were creative divergences from what we expect from WrestleMania. And for me, night 1 worked more than night 2. The night 2, the bouncing around, the teleport, it kind of. The flashbacks and stuff, really creative stuff. I just think, again, it was slightly rushed. It could have done with a bit more production value put into it if you're going to do the whole kind of make it. I mean, you're right. The second night was more like a movie, not trying to be a wrestling match. It was just a straight up mini.
Let's be honest here, they were both very TV.
Absolutely.
Neither had the production value that we've come to expect from the E, let alone the production value that I would imagine if they were delivering that for WrestleMania. But then at the same time, what I think is fantastic is because Mania was going to be empty, I think that's the only reason we got those 2 matches. Like without it, I think I think we would have ended up with some probably quite dull matches.
Yeah, absolutely.
AJ versus Taker would probably be a bit of a mismatch these days at Mania, and probably,
I do agree. I think so. I think putting their backs against the wall is always when WWE is at their best. Is when they're put into a corner and they've got to fight their way out, they suddenly just find a fifth gear and they come up with some amazing stuff. And those two examples, are reminded me how amazingly creative the people that run things behind the scenes in WWE can be when they need to be. So I think we're going to agree to disagree on both of those. I think we kind of, the general consensus is that we think they were a great experiment, but we each have our preferred one for different reasons. Do we want to talk about Edge versus Orton?
Because I think briefly, because I think it's important to, because I think again we're a bit different. We're a bit differing on opinion on that again.
I think this was the Marmite match. I think so many people, and I'm going to agree. Straight off the bat, I'm going to agree that I felt it was at least 10 to 15 minutes too long.
Oh, mate, how long did that match run? 30 odd minutes?
It was just short of 40 minutes. Now,
25 minutes too long.
My initial reaction to that was, go on, bloody hell, lads, take it home. This is going on a bit, isn't it? Because the trouble with it is that they went for a fight. They went for a brawl. And with a brawl, it's strikes and chokes and kicks and that sort of thing. You can't be throwing a lot of suplexes and RKOs and slams and things onto what is essentially just a very hard floor. And so what they tried to do differently was to, brawl around the building as much as possible and show you all these different areas. And they went to the gym, they went to the boardroom, they went to the warehouse and stuff. And, that became quite interesting, especially the last sort of 5 to 10 minutes in the warehouse became, I sort of, my interest picked up again. So I had the same criticisms as everyone else, and this might be a bit naughty, but I then went away and watched the Edge 24 documentary, which I thought they had, even before I'd watched that, I thought they had a tremendous fight. It looked like a fight, but you've got some real life fight experience, and that no fight ever lasts 40 minutes. It's normally over in about 2 or 3 seconds, isn't it? Like, let's be honest.
Moments. They feel like forever, but it's moments. You get out of it sweating, thinking you've been in there for. You think you've done. You get out of it thinking you've just done 10 rounds, but actually, moments.
Yeah. So if we are going to say that what they tried to present was a fight between two guys that legit have got this kind of like weird love-hate relationship, no one should be able to survive a 40-minute back and forth punch. Their faces would have been black and swollen, and they would have had
their hands would have been damaged. Like, this is the thing. This is where you kind of like, when you have a 40-minute brawl type match, you're thinking, well, your hands would be damaged, your faces would be damaged.
Which is the problem with trying to have what I would call a hyper real wrestling match that's trying to replicate as close as it can to being a real fight. If you're going to try and do that, then you've got to work within the parameters of, if you're going to try and make it realistically, most fights like that don't last very long. You can't punch a man's face for 40 minutes without having effects to your own hands and lasting damage to his face. So the timing took me, the length of the match took me away from a little bit from what they were trying to achieve, which was to make it look like a real fight.
I also thought the selling early was like, this is just again, this is my opinion, but the selling was so over the top.
Yeah,
like, I know he gets nailed, and I haven't watched any of the build up. I watched the vignette, so I get it. There was some damage put on Edge. The story is that Randy put him in the hospital in the run up to this, right? But you're telling me that a man who's decided he's fit enough to wrestle can't take one move at the beginning. Suddenly he's all Bambi with deer legs and can't stand or walk, but then proceeds to have a 40-minute brawling, far-reaching, wandering match. Like, what? And then it also, and maybe it's because there wasn't a crowd there, but then Randy fed off that as well. So Randy's like Randy's on top for like the first, must have been the first 10, 12 minutes, certainly until they get backstage to the gym. He's on top, and then Edge finds some return, jumps up, grabs a chin-up bar, and kicks Randy while he's holding a bumper plate, probably a 5 kilo bumper, not a 20 kilo, but it's a big plate because it's a bumper, right? And then suddenly Orton sat on his bum to one side, like he just, and yeah, because it's a brawl and he's just been kicked in the face with a plate. Yeah, exactly. But I don't know. For me, I really, again, because I don't watch it, and I saw that it was Orton versus Edge, and I just thought, oh, okay, this is going to be my favorite. I thought this is going to be my favorite match. They're going to get in the ring, and I'm going to see them do all the things that I love these two doing. We're going to see RKOs, we're going to see spears, we're going to see execution, we're going to see, the Viper doing his thing. We're going to see Edge in the corner pulling his own hair out, getting ready to go. I just thought, and I didn't see that. The one thing I did like, I tell you, although there is one thing I did like about it, I really liked about it, was I liked the psychology of Randy. I liked that twisted, that kind of twisted friendship, that twisted mentality of like the hero's journey of like, I'm going to protect my best friend from getting hurt by hurting him. I thought that was great. I thought, but I think it could have been a bit shorter.
I just think that ultimately what we needed to do was trim the fat, because there was 3 or 4 really cool moments, but they were peppered in a lot amongst a very long, drawn out, not very action-packed match. Now, again, you were saying about, what you expected them to do in the ring would have been great. I think that actually I applaud them for trying to do something different, because, in a match with an empty arena, what can you do to be different? I get it. But I'm going back to my what I said about watching the Edge documentary and why this has swayed my opinion on it slightly. There's parts in that documentary where you see his preparation for getting ready for the Rumble and for WrestleMania, and the work that this guy puts in to get himself back into shape is incredible. And he says openly on this documentary, he's like, well, I'm not training to come back and do 4 moves in 40 seconds. I'm coming back to do a proper, I want to do proper matches. And actually, I don't know, there's something about the way that documentary made me feel about Edge that I was just like, I respect actually the fact that he, even though it was an empty arena and he probably could have just done exactly what you just said and done it in about 10 minutes, he had this goal in mind of, if I'm coming back to do decent long matches. They tried to do something different. They tried to have a fight. They tried to do a brawl around the arena. And I think they just both wanted to see if Edge could do, close to 40 minutes, which he did.
Shave and a haircut. It's a shave and a haircut kind of song. Shave and a haircut. Oh yeah. You better buckle up.
Part of this podcast is to link whatever we put in the barber's chair. We're going to try and link it to something from our past. Try and think back to some of our early memories starting out in wrestling together. And I'm going to call this segment the stubble years. So this is when you and we maybe had a little bit of facial fuzz, but it was still developing. And we were developing as wrestlers. And I thought the topic really that we could talk about here is our own experience with wrestling in empty or near empty arenas, because I think every wrestler has got that story about rocking up to a venue with there being mostly empty chairs, and kind of having that internal discussion with yourself about what you're going to do, how you're going to tackle this. So I know you've got an occasion in particular that you want to bring up, and then I'll talk to you about my little story about that day as well.
So okay. So I think we've all got, like you said, I think we've all got some, and I don't want to bury anyone. I'm not criticizing anyone when I bring this one up. But I think the worst one for me, I've done some shows which have been pony, had very few people, but the one that stands out as being by far the poorest attended was a summer run. A summer run that wasn't because it fell so flat on the first one. Was down in Bournemouth, and this must be a good probably 5 or 6 years ago. It was before I started working for Kapow. It was before I did my singles debut. It was really while we were still, me and the guys I was coming up with. It was when we were still in the training school. We were still in the academy. I mean, it was kind of our first foray. So when I say we, I mean James Castle, Gideon or Rich, if you know him backstage. So Gideon, the Bodums. Although Josh had been doing a few bits, he still wasn't the Bodum that everyone knows now. It was still he was still working his way up. Although he was probably the most exposed out of all of us. And we went along and we met you and a bunch of your guys, Jake and Steve. I think there was just the three of you in the van. You, Steve, and Jake.
We were in the van. I remember that. And
then Rishi was there. So when we talk about names at this match, right? So this was in Bournemouth. It was in the summer, first week of the summer holidays. There was Rishi. There was Chris K, there was Flatliner, there was you, there was Jake, there was Steve, there was me, there was James Castle, who's now, a big, one of the names out there on the indie scene these days. There's Gideon, who's been one of the names on, he's done the likes of York Hall and all sorts. He's worked all sorts. Rishi, who's done everything. And the Bodums. We had a couple of female wrestlers there for some flavour, I guess. So yeah, it was a really packed colour. There's a lot of names there. There's a lot of names there. But yeah, so we turned up.
First
we turn up, and you guys are putting the ring. You guys are putting the ring on the stage, which didn't quite fit on.
Can I talk a little bit about the absolute madness of that ring job, because it was on the pier. And the venue was was it like halfway down the pier, or maybe even at the very end of the pier?
At the very end. Bournemouth Pier, so, the pavilion is at the very end.
You can't take the van onto the pier. It's, it's a wooden steel structure. It's not really made to hold 1-ton Luton vans with an extra ton's worth of ring in it. So what we were having to do, we had basically almost like a pallet trolley that we were putting as much as the ring on as we could, and sort of offloading it from the van onto the trolley, down the pier, offloading it, and then going back back and forth with this trolley. So already we're like, oh, this is an absolute nightmare. This is like so much more work than it may be worth. And then obviously we get in and we find out there's, how many people was there, Mad Dog?
Well, I think my memory was there was 5 people, I think. In my memory, it might have been 7, right? But there was definitely 3, because the Bodums are from that neck of the woods, and their parents and their sister were there. And I think there was maybe 1 or 2 walk-ups, but that was it, because there was no posters up. When we got there, we got sent into town in our gear to try and hand out some flyers in the square. But that was like an hour or 2 before the show. So yeah, I think it was 5 people. It might have been 7.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we're not trying to bury anyone or point fingers or whatever. Sometimes shows just flop, and it's just one of those things. You can analyze all the different reasons: not enough advertising, wrong time of the year, wrong venue, whatever it was. There was a number of factors that ended up with that show not being a success. And we're not trying to bury anyone at all by saying that.
No, and I actually would say it's one of the the reason why it comes to mind to be like Mania is because the people that were booked were so keen. We were so eager. We were so hot for it. We were so into wrestling. We were in our training. Like I worked with James. Me and James had a tag team at the time called the Mercenaries. We worked against the Flying Bodums, as they were called at the time. And we'd worked them a couple of times. We worked them a couple of times before that and since then. And we went out there and we did the match. We did the match we wanted to do, and we were trainees, so that match was full of stuff. Like,
yeah.
We were trainees, so we were doing stuff that we never do now. Throwing moves in the shine. Half a dozen suplexes, belly to bellies, Mission Ogre number 2s. Just stuff that you just like. I'm just filling this match up with stuff.
Yeah, I can't recall who I worked that night. It might have been Chris or someone like that. But I do remember everyone saying, "Okay, well, we're going to go out and we're going to have a show anyway," and everyone did, what their version of it was. So
I remember you won the Rumble because you did a middle rope like tip out hid underneath the ring, and then came up and took Chris, and the end was you taking Chris and Flatliner out.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
That was the finale, if I remember.
Yeah. So the moral of the story is that we've all got stories like that, and I think we all go out and we all try to give those, even if it's only 5 or 6 people, we try to give them a show, because at the end of the day, they paid their money. Yeah,
that's it. You've got 2 choices, haven't you? And we've all been there. We've all been stood there in the locker room, or the cupboard, or the hallway, or the stairs, wherever it is you're getting changed at the venue, and you turn to someone who's front of house, and you're like, "Hey, what's the house like? What's the draw like? What we're looking at?" And then someone will inevitably say, "Oh, it looks pretty empty. We've only got one side," or "We're going to try and split them up and get them around 2 sides," or "We've only got 30 people in and we put 200 chairs out," and then in the bottom of your stomach, in your heart, it just drops a little bit, and you're like, "Oh." But you've got 2 choices. At that moment, though, you've got 2 choices. To just go out there and just do nothing, to abandon your match, cancel all your spots, and just go out there and go through the motions. And in my opinion, that's the worst kind of attitude and the worst kind of thing you can do. Your other option is to go, you know what? Those people, they've all paid the exact same money that they would have paid if there was 500 people. And they've paid the exact same money. They've come out, they've driven down, they've parked up, they've brought their kids. You know what? Let's go out there. Let's do our match. Let's give them a show. Because, and I think you've got a story which actually links to this, because, you never know who they're going to talk to. So you might be in a crowd of 15 or 20, and you might do like a standout spot. It doesn't have to be high flying, it doesn't have to be dangerous. It might be a bit of crowd work, it might be a bit of comedy, it might be a clever moment. But you don't know when someone watches that and thinks, "Oh, that was amazing," and they speak to a mate at work, and that mate at work goes, "Oh yeah, well, I used to take my kids to the wrestling. I wonder if my son and his kids would like to go. Where was it again?" You don't know when that conversation is going to happen.
Well, this is it, and the story that you're talking about is actually, there could be a number of occasions where I've been at shows where the draw has been disappointing, and I always have that mentality of, these people that have turned up, if you ever want them to ever turn up to any wrestling show ever again, you've got to give them a good show, because it's already going to be awkward enough. They're going to be sat there. They're not going to want to clap and join in because we're very British, and the lights are on and nobody wants to get involved unless everyone else is joining in. But if you then put forth a lackluster product, their lasting memory of wrestling is that they went to a poorly attended show. They watched a bunch of really naff matches where the guys were going through the motions. They will probably never attend a live wrestling event ever again.
That's not your wrestling event. That's anyone's, because they're not like us. They don't know that there's different products and that different products have different qualities. All they see is, I went to British wrestling and it sucked. So
yeah, exactly. And I think, if you're one of those guys that goes out there and goes, do you know what? We'll just do, this, that, and the other, and we won't bother. And, I just really can't be bothered just because the draw's not there. You either need to stop the show, take yourself off the show, or change your attitude completely, because, as I say, you are essentially, there's only a relatively small number of people in this country that actually follow and like wrestling, and if you contribute to that number dwindling by putting forth a half-assed effort on these kind of smaller shows when you're starting out, by the time you get to a higher level, there's going to be no one watching.
That's it, right? You're complaining that you're not got anyone coming to your show, but what are you doing about it? And okay, maybe you don't live in that area. Maybe you don't live in that area. Maybe you're not a promoter. Maybe you've been doing it for a little while and you don't think you should be in postering and flyering, right? Which I disagree with anyway. But I think everyone should be doing their part and pushing products and pushing shows. But let's say you travelled 5 miles to that show, right? The one thing you can do to improve the draw in that area is to do a barn burner, to go out there and give it everything. Have a great match. And I'm not saying put you on. Maybe there are times, and this goes back to WrestleMania again, maybe you won't put yourself on the line. You might call short and say, you know what, let's not do that Spanish fly. Still have a high spot, Don't remove the high spot. Still have something in there, but maybe, you know, take out the dangerous move. I'm not saying that any of us should put our bodies on the line for small shows. In fact, I think that's probably really important, not to injure yourself for small shows or take silly risks on a show which maybe won't get the attendance or the attention that those sort of moves or that sort of danger deserves. But
I think you're
that's
right.
the one thing we can all do.
It's moderation. It's you've got to size up the situation and make decisions based on what's right for you, what's right for the show, etc. But there is a difference, I think, between saving some of the bigger spots for the bigger shows, but then also having a capable, entertaining, quality match that doesn't necessarily include all of those slightly higher risk maneuvers that you might save for the shows where you're trying to get noticed.
Well, you know my style. You know that I don't believe in delivering, and delivering doesn't involve doing crazy bumps. You know that about everyone who watches my matches knows that about my style and my matches, right? And in our tag matches, that's not my lane, right? But you don't have to. I strongly believe that I deliver on a show in the same way that you do, or the same way that another guy might do moonies or flips or 540s or whatever it is they're doing, red arrows or whatever it might be, and crazy table bumps or apron bumps. The guy that stands in the middle and tells a great story and knows his place on the show and knows his place within the dynamics of the wrestling story that's going on around him, you can still deliver. Going out there and being a good verbal mouthpiece, going out there and giving a crap and talking. There's 10 people. Talk to those 10 people. In fact, when there are 10 people, it's so much easier to give them attention, because you're not, when there's 500, 600, 700 people or 300 people, you can only give your attention to 10 people, right? And that's not the whole crowd. That's a small portion of the crowd. But when you've got a small crowd, then you can really be on them. So, work, and you don't know how that's going to grow. You might come back in 6 months and there might be 30 more people there. And they're there because the people that were there enjoyed your match. They enjoyed what you did. And so you've got to come along. If that big fat guy's there again, he's hilarious. Or if that little skinny guy's there again, he does these crazy things onto like 5 million people stood on the outside. But the thing is, you don't know when 2 people will talk, right? But I guarantee you do know that they will talk. So the one thing you can't get right is good publicity. Good publicity is really hard to come by. Bad publicity is super easy to get. Like, just do that bad match and those people will tell everyone it was pony. They will tell everyone that British wrestling sucks. We saw some stuff, it was terrible, and they will tell everyone. They'll tell everyone.
And I had the same mentality with KWE, a local promotion, Knockout Wrestling. They were doing okay. They were ticking along. They weren't getting like the best houses, but I was keen to have these kind of like barn burner matches. I was tickling that kind of hardcore niche product that I'm trying to get into, and doing those kind of like crazy matches in front of smaller crowds. And people would say, "Oh, you're mad," but recently that draw has improved, and I'm not trying to blow my horn and say that that's because of me. No, it's not. It's a group effort. I know that there's guys behind the scenes that everyone's
working really hard there, and
especially with stuff like advertising.
Right? We experience this in Kapow. We always have done, right? It's easy to look down on the little guys trying something different, working really hard. It's easy to look down and crap and piss downwards, right? And stand on a mountain and say, well, we've achieved this, right? And forget what it took to get there, because the pinnacle of that is so narrow and the foundations is so wide, and everything that went into it, it's easy to forget how you got there when you're stood up there looking down on other people. Like, KWE is a small outfit, a small local outfit, and they put it on for themselves. They put it on for their locals. They put it on for their friends and family, and that's grown. I went to a show, in fact, you were on that show. I went to the show at Christmas. It's a small hall. You could not sit down. There were people stood up. And that's and there's no massive name. Okay, there's Rishi. Rishi was on the card, so that's a bit of a name. But there's no massive names. They haven't flown anyone in. They haven't brought any like £500 costing guy in. It's just a bunch of guys that have worked really hard for a couple of years, and they put a strong, solid card together. They put a nice, fun family, proper family show on that people enjoy. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter if it's not indie-rific. It doesn't matter that like there's not 1 million followers on their Facebook or YouTube channel. It doesn't matter, because that's not what they're trying to deliver. They're trying to deliver a show that people enjoy. And also, what I love about those sort of smaller organisations, especially, this goes back to us in Kapow and some of the other promotions that we work for that aren't massive. Like, the people making it enjoy it too.
Yeah. That's it. I wouldn't.
Those locker rooms, I wouldn't change. I'm thinking of things like UBW and Kapow and KWE, where the locker room is hot and they want to do it.
Yeah, and when you surround yourself with like-minded individuals like that, it always turns out better. Right, we're sort of rapidly nearing that kind of magic number of I want to try and get this podcast in under an hour, and I really wanted to finish with a funny story going back to that Bournemouth Piers thing. So you may remember back in those days we used to rent a Luton van, a big box van, from wherever we could get it, because it was
usually
the ideal.
Usually somewhere called Rent a Wreck,
Oh,
or
they were
prayer, or give me 50p and it might work.
So I go down to pick up this van. Straight away, he gives me one of those two cans of that, what's it called, auto inflate kind of foam for your tires. And he's like, well, one of the tires is going to go flat on you, you're going to need this. I was like, oh my goodness. So off we go, and sure enough, after a while the van just died. We had to push start this huge 1-ton van. I had me, Steve, and Jake in the van with us. Every time we stopped to refuel or to have a break or whatever it was, we would have to find a way to push start this huge van. What made it even funnier after that was the fact that the passenger door didn't open. And so the only way was to have me drive, putting everything in gear, ready to bump start, have Jake and Steve push, and then basically do Dukes of Hazzard, me trying to drive around in a small circle as slowly as possible so that these two boys could dive in through the passenger window. Absolute nightmare. Then you add on to that the whole onload, offload via a trolley thing. Then you add in the fact that it was not very well attended, and we were all going to get delayed payment days, and so it was a long day. We were all starting to feel a little bit grouchy. Then I go to return the van after unloading the ring and all of that. So we're talking the wee hours of the morning now. The van has been unloaded finally. We're all a bit hacked off. We've had a rough day. And I drop off the van and I parked my car in what I thought was a secure little car park off of where we pick up this van. We go to get into my car only to realise that they've actually locked the entrances. So now I'm stuck in my car in a car park after this long day going, really. And Steve Love, not a particularly well-built man, in a moment of like Hulk-like strength, I saw him rip one of the kind of bollards out of the floor, which was concrete, had a big lump of concrete on the bottom of it where it had been put into the ground. The ground around it had become loose. And so he just literally, like, with all of his might, went, and it was like a moment out of a TV show where this bollard comes out of the ground and he swings this kind of like metal fence thing out of the way enough so that I could get my car through, and then he just walks it back and drops it into the muddy hole that he just created. Now I was thinking to myself, oh my goodness, if there's like security cameras, I'm going to get into so much trouble. But by this point I was just relieved that I could actually drive my car home, because otherwise we were going to have to phone someone, and it was like, as I say, the wee hours of the morning, so it was going to be difficult. The story doesn't end there though. As angry as I was super keen to get home. I was hungry. It'd been a long day. I wanted to shower. It'd been very stressful. I may have been going slightly over the speed limit on the way home. By this point, it's 3 a.m., right? So there's no one on the roads. And I'm not talking about flying down there at the speed of light. I was maybe about 5 or 6 miles over the limit, and I got flashed and I got pulled. And I was honest. The police officer that pulled me said, "Do you know what the speed limit is along here?" Now, had I said, like, if I had had the wherewithal by this point to say, "Oh, I think it might be 40," I don't remember the last time I saw a sign, I may have got away with a warning. But because I went, "It's 30," like that, he went, "Yeah, you were doing about 36. Pull over, I'll do you a ticket." And I was like, "Ah." And honestly, the car went silent because I think the two lads in the back just thought, "No, if we say."
It sums up that day, though. That really does just sum up that day. Those days like that usually end that way.
Yeah, and it's one of those trying days where you just think, "Is this all worth it?" But then you load up the van the next weekend and off you go.
You wash your gear, you put it back in your bag, you get to the van, and you go and do it again. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, I think that's a great note to end on.
We're gonna try and do this once a week. I think we're gonna try and put something or someone or a match or a show or something from our path, our training, or something about wrestling. We're gonna put that in the barber's chair. We're either gonna grow it or mow it. We're gonna give you our opinions. If you want to add anything to it, you want to give us any thing you want us to talk about, anything you're interested in about the beards, about either of us individually, or about our opinions on something, please just shoot us a message. You can find us on Facebook, the Beards, Atlas and Mad Dog. Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, Mad Dog.
Oh, 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 oh.